The room is unbearably quiet. I stand in the doorway, unsure if I have the strength to step inside. It's been 2 weeks and I still can't bring myself to touch anything. Her scent lingers, soft, floral, faint, like the last breath of spring clinging to winter air. The walls are still painted that pale lavender she loved so much, though the sunlight filtering through the curtains makes them look gray. Her bed is made just as she left it. A small stuffed bear sits propped against the pillow, a gift from her 10th birthday. I remember the way she clutched it that day, beaming as though I'd handed her the world. Now it's just another relic in a room frozen in time, untouched and unoccupied. I step closer, my hand brushing the desk, where a stack of sketchbooks lies in a neat pile. She always kept her things orderly, even when her life was unraveling. My fingers hesitate above the top notebook, the edges worn from her constant flipping. I've avoided opening it, afraid of what I might find, or worse, what I might not. Instead, my gaze drifts to the window, where faint streaks of condensation blur the view of the garden below. The flowers she planted last summer are still there, withering now, but stubbornly holding on. The irony isn't lost on me. I pick up the journal from her bedside table, the one she always kept close but never let me read. It's heavier than I expected, as though it holds the weight of her untold thoughts. I flip it open, my hands trembling, and the first page greets me with her delicate handwriting. To the world, I seem quiet, but inside I'm screaming. The words hit me like a punch to the chest, stealing the air from my lungs. I sink onto her bed, clutching the book like it's the only piece of her I have left. My tears fall, staining the ink, but I can't stop. I want to tell her I'm sorry. I want to tell her I would have done anything to take away her pain. I want to tell her I wasn't strong enough to save her. But all I can do is sit here in the silence she left behind, trying to piece together the fragments of a girl I thought I knew. And maybe, just maybe, I'll find her in these pages. The changes started so subtly I almost missed them. Emma had always been a quiet child. Thoughtful, observant, more interested in books than playground drama. At 13, I assumed her growing moodiness was just a symptom of adolescence. She still smiled, still laughed, still curled up on the couch to watch movies with me on Friday nights. But then the silences became heavier, weighted with something I couldn't name. She stopped talking about her friends, brushing off my questions with one-word answers. Her laughter came less often. Her smiles turned into forced curvatures of the lips. One evening, I found her sitting alone in her room, staring at the wall. Her homework lay untouched on the desk. When I asked what was wrong, she shrugged and said she was tired. It was a simple enough answer, but something in her voice, flat, distant, pricked at me. I tried to push the worry aside. Teenage girls were complicated, I told myself. Hormonal, emotional. But the knot in my stomach tightened each time I caught her staring into space, her shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. One day, I noticed she was wearing long sleeves in the middle of summer. She flinched when I asked about it and muttered something about being cold. The conversation stuck with me, a nagging suspicion that wouldn't leave. I didn't realize then how much I was already losing her. It wasn't Emma who told me. It was a friend of hers, a girl named Mia, who let it slip during a rushed conversation in my kitchen. She hasn't been herself since, what happened last year. Mia had said, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. Mia's face turned pale, and her eyes darted around the room like she was searching for an escape route. I thought you knew. She told me not to say anything. I pressed her until the truth came tumbling out in fragmented sentences. A boy from school. A party Emma hadn't wanted to go to. Something she had never consented to. When Mia left, I sat at the kitchen table for hours, staring at the untouched cup of tea in front of me. My mind reeled with questions I didn't know how to ask. Why didn't she tell me? How could I not have noticed? I went to Emma's room that evening, my hands trembling as I knocked on her door. She looked up from her desk, her face pale under the glow of the lamp. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice breaking. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw the child she used to be, the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she was scared. Then her expression hardened, and she turned away. "It doesn't matter," she said. "It's over." I sat on the edge of her bed, struggling to find the right words. Emma, this isn't something you just move past. You don't have to go through this alone. Please talk to me. She didn't look at me. I'm fine, she said, her voice brittle, but she wasn't fine. I could see it in the way her hands trembled when she reached for her phone, in the dark circles under her eyes. I wanted to hold her, to tell her I'd protect her, that nothing like this would ever happen again. But she pulled away from me, retreating into the silence that had become her armor. The first therapist didn't work out. Neither did the second. Each time, Emma would sit stiffly in the chair, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the floor. She answered their questions in clipped sentences, giving nothing away. After a few sessions, she refused to go back. It's a waste of time, she said. But I couldn't give up. I spent hours researching trauma counselors, reading reviews, calling offices, and begging for appointments. I didn't care about the cost or the waiting lists. All I cared about was getting her the help she needed. When I finally found someone she liked, a gentle woman named Dr. Shan Patel, I felt a flicker of hope. Emma still didn't say much during their sessions, but she started drawing again. I took it as a sign that maybe, just maybe, we were making progress. There were good days when I'd catch a glimpse of the old Emma, the one who used to dance around the kitchen while singing off-key. But the bad days were still there, lurking like shadows in the corners of our lives. One night, I found her crying in the bathroom, her wrists red and raw. My heart shattered as I wrapped her in my arms, rocking her back and forth like I used to when she was little. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. She didn't answer. She just sobbed against my shoulder, her body trembling like a leaf in the wind. In that moment, I realized that loving her meant fighting for her, even when she didn't have the strength to fight for herself, and I promised her I would never stop. The day Emma turned 15 was colder than I'd expected for early spring. I remember the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window as she sat across from me, toying with her cereal. Her face was thinner by then, her once rosy cheeks pale and hollowed. She barely looked up when I handed her the small gift I'd bought, a necklace with a delicate star pendant. "Thanks," she murmured, sliding it into her pocket without opening the box. Later that evening, as I cleared her laundry from the bathroom floor, I found the crumpled piece of notebook paper. The handwriting wasn't hers, but the words burned into my mind like a brand. "You'll never be anything but broken." It wasn't until weeks later that I discovered the source, an older boy she'd trusted, someone who had been kind to her when she was vulnerable, someone who had shattered her trust all over again. Emma refused to press charges. "It's not worth it," she said, her voice flat and lifeless. "It won't change anything." Her refusal crushed me, but I respected her choice. It wasn't my pain to bear, though I felt every ounce of it like a knife twisting in my chest. After that, Emma's bad days outnumbered the good. She dropped out of extracurriculars, stopped answering her friends' texts, and began spending hours locked in her room. I caught glimpses of her struggles. Empty pill bottles shoved under her mattress, scribbled notes in her sketchbooks that read like cries for help. Once I found a drawing of a girl standing on the edge of a cliff, her shadow stretching long and dark behind her. "Emma, we need to talk about this," I said, holding the sketch in my hands. Her eyes flicked to the paper before darting away. "It's just a drawing," she muttered. But I knew better. I tried everything, therapy, medication, support groups, but nothing seemed to reach her. She went through the motions, attending sessions and taking her prescriptions, but the light in her eyes had dimmed to a flicker. One night, I found her sitting on the kitchen floor with a kitchen knife in her lap. My heart stopped. "Emma, no," I whispered, rushing to her side. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore, Mom," she sobbed. "It hurts too much." I held her tightly, my own tears falling into her hair. "We'll find a way," I promised. "We'll keep trying. Just hold on." But deep down, I could feel her slipping away. The morning Emma told me about her decision, the sky was gray and heavy with clouds. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I've applied for euthanasia," she said, her voice steady. "It's legal now, for mental suffering." I stared at her, unable to process the words. "Emma, you can't be serious." Her eyes met mine, calm and resolute. I am. I've thought about this for a long time. It's the only way I'll ever feel peace. No, I said, my voice trembling. No, there has to be another way. You're too young to make this decision. You haven't given yourself enough time to heal. She shook her head. I've tried, Mom. I've tried everything. Therapy, medication, art, exercise, you name it, I've done it. But the pain never goes away. It's always there, like a weight I can't lift. I wanted to argue, to plead with her, to tell her that life would get better if she just held on a little longer. But the look in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't anger or defiance, it was exhaustion. I love you, she said softly, and I know this will hurt you, but I need you to understand that this isn't about you. It's about me, and I can't keep living like this. I broke down, sobbing into my hands as she sat quietly across from me. When I finally looked up, she reached out and took my hand. Please, Mom, she whispered. I need you to be with me when the time comes. The weeks that followed were a blur of emotions. I oscillated between anger and despair, begging her to reconsider and trying to understand her decision. I read articles, consulted therapists, and attended support groups for parents of suicidal teens, hoping someone could give me the right words to change her mind. But no one could. She's not in her right mind, I told Dr. Patel during a tearful session. How can they let her make a decision like this? Dr. Patel's expression was sympathetic but firm. Emma's pain is real, Sarah. And in her mind, this is the only solution. It's not about agreeing with her. It's about supporting her in the way she needs. Supporting her felt impossible, but the thought of her going through this alone was worse. In the quiet hours of the night, I sat in her room, running my fingers over the worn pages of her journal. I read her words over and over, trying to find the moment when I lost her. But the truth was, she had been slipping through my fingers for years. One evening, as I watched her sketch at the dining table, I realized how at peace she seemed. The lines of her drawing were steady, her face relaxed. It was the first time in years I'd seen her without the shadow of pain clouding her features. And in that moment, I understood that this was her way of reclaiming control over a life that had stolen so much from her. The day Emma's request was approved, she sat beside me on the couch, holding my hand. I know you don't agree with this, she said, and I don't expect you to, but it means everything to me that you're here. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. In the weeks leading up to the procedure, we spent as much time together as we could. We cooked her favorite meals, watched her favorite movies, and stayed up late talking about everything and nothing. There were moments when I thought about running, packing her into the car and driving somewhere far away where no one could find us. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. All I could do was hold her close and pray that I was doing the right thing, even if it felt like my heart was being torn in two. The day arrived too quickly, as if time itself conspired against me. The morning was calm, almost cruelly serene, with sunlight spilling through the windows like nothing had changed. Emma was quiet, but not withdrawn. She spent the morning sitting in her room, sketching while I made breakfast. I hovered in the doorway, watching her pencil move steadily across the paper. "What are you drawing?" I asked, my voice trembling. She turned the sketch pad toward me. It was a garden filled with wildflowers, sunlight streaming through the trees. "A place I'd like to visit," she said softly. I didn't trust myself to respond. Instead, I walked over and kissed her on the top of her head, inhaling the scent of her shampoo as if trying to memorize it. At the clinic, everything was sterile and quiet. The staff spoke in hushed tones, their kindness piercing through the haze of my grief. Emma held my hand as we walked to the room. Her grip was steady, her face calm. "I love you, Mom," she said as she lay down on the bed. "I love you too," I choked out. My voice cracked under the weight of those 3 words, knowing they were the last ones she'd hear from me. I held her hand until it went still. In the days following her death, the house felt unbearably empty. I avoided her room, unable to face the stillness that now seemed suffocating. The lavender walls that once brought her comfort now felt like a cruel reminder of what I'd lost. Everywhere I turned, there were echoes of her drawings scattered on the dining table, her books lined up neatly on the shelf, her favorite mug sitting unwashed in the sink. Each object was a fragment of her life, and together They formed a mosaic of grief that I couldn't escape. I spent hours reading her journal, searching for answers, for understanding. Her words were raw and unfiltered, a window into the depths of her pain. I cried over every page, mourning the girl she had been and the woman she would never become. But amid the sorrow, I found glimpses of hope. "I'm not giving up," she had written. "I'm choosing peace." I began to question everything, my decisions, my role as her mother, the society that had failed her. I attended a support group for parents who had lost children to suicide, hoping to find solace in shared pain. "What do you tell yourself to keep going?" I asked during one meeting, my voice barely above a whisper. A woman sitting across from me, her face lined with years of grief, gave me a sad smile. "I tell myself that love is the only thing we can hold on to," she said. "Even if it wasn't enough to save them, it was enough to matter." Her words stuck with me, though they didn't ease the ache in my chest. Months passed, and I found myself drawn to Emma's art. Her sketchbooks were filled with landscapes she'd never visited, people she'd never met, and emotions she couldn't put into words. I decided to compile her work into a collection, a tribute to the beauty she created despite the pain she carried. I worked late into the nights, scanning her drawings, organizing her notes, and writing introductions for each piece. When the collection was published, I received letters from people who saw themselves in Emma's story: survivors, parents, siblings, friends. They thanked me for sharing her truth, for giving a voice to the struggles so many kept hidden. It didn't bring her back, but it gave her life a meaning that extended beyond her pain. One morning, as I walked through the garden Emma had planted the summer before, I noticed something new. Among the withered flowers, a single wildflower had bloomed, its petals bright and defiant against the frost. I knelt beside it, running my fingers over its delicate petals. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: hope. Emma's loss would always be a part of me, a scar that never fully healed. But her life, her love, and her art had left a mark on the world that couldn't be erased. As I stood in the sunlight, I realized that while her story had ended, mine was still being written, and maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to carry her with me, not as a weight, but as a light. It's been 2 years since Emma left now, and the world has moved on. At least that's what it looks like on the surface. The seasons change, the sun rises and sets, and people pass me on the street with smiles that don't falter. But for me, time has slowed. I've kept her room the same, though I visit it less now. Her scent has faded from the sheets, her notebooks remain untouched, and the necklace I gave her on her 15th birthday still hangs on the bedpost. Sometimes I sit on the edge of her bed, running my fingers over the star pendant, wondering if she ever wore it when I wasn't looking. I've spent countless hours in the garden, the one Emma and I planted together the summer before everything unraveled. She'd insisted on wildflowers, saying they reminded her of freedom, of how beauty could thrive even in chaos. At first, tending to it felt like a chore, a futile attempt to keep something alive when so much had been lost, but over time, it became my solace. This year, the garden has flourished like never before. The flowers are taller, their colors brighter, as if the earth itself is trying to tell her story. I've started planting more: sunflowers, daisies, even lavender, each one a small act of defiance against the void her absence left behind. Last week, I received a letter from a young woman named Clara. She had seen Emma's art collection online and recognized herself in the sketches and words. "Her drawings gave me courage," the letter said, "to tell my story, to seek help, to believe that I'm more than my pain. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but please know that Emma saved me." I sat on the porch, the letter trembling in my hands, tears spilling onto the page. For the first time, I felt something other than guilt, other than loss. I felt pride. Emma had always said she wasn't strong, but she was wrong. She didn't just survive, she created, she loved, and now, even in her absence, she healed. Today I walk into the garden with a basket full of seeds. As I kneel in the dirt, pressing each one into the soil, I think about Emma's favorite sketch, the one she showed me on her last morning, a garden filled with wildflowers. "I'll make it for you," I whisper to the wind. "I'll make it everything you dreamed of." As I finish planting the last seed, the sun breaks through the clouds, bathing the garden in golden light. It feels like a blessing, like a quiet reassurance that she is still here in some way, woven into every petal, every blade of grass. The pain hasn't disappeared, and I doubt it ever will. But now it feels softer, like a bruise instead of a gaping wound. And as I rise to my feet, brushing the dirt from my hands, I realize that the garden isn't just for Emma anymore. It's for me too. For us both.